Welcome to the center of the universe and the home of the 18-time Grey Cup champion Toronto Argonauts. This is the X's and Argos podcast with Ben Grant and JB.
Welcome to the X's and Argos postgame reaction podcast brought to you by Something in the Water Brewing as the Hamilton Tiger Cats down the Toronto Argonauts 27-24 in a game that looked very much over for most of it. And then suddenly the Argos came charging back. You could hear a pin drop in this place, but the Argos simply ran out of time and they have themselves to blame. It was a mistake-filled game, no doubt about it. We'll get to that entire recap. We'll go through what happened to the Argos, if they maybe look at changes next week. But I think maybe most importantly, the injury situation, because so many players went down today. My name is Ben Grant. His name's JB. And I want to tell you about Something in the Water Brewing because I want you to make plans to join me at Something in the Water Brewing this coming Saturday. The Argos finally have a home game after this 3-game road trip. And who would have thought in the 3-game road trip, the one game that the Toronto Argonauts would win would be in Montreal. But here we are. So next Saturday, hosting the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, who desperately need a win themselves. It'd be a great time to come and join me at Something in the Water Brewing pre-game. Get down there for 4 o'clock. Have a couple of drinks, make your way down to BMO Field. It's just steps from BMO Field. It's steps from Lamport Stadium to where the Argos practice. It's a great place to go after practice. It's a great place to go before the game, after the game, you name it. Check out Something in the Water in Liberty Village. JB, let's get into this one. The Argos came out flat, like they did not need to do much other than show up today. And the Ticats came out ready to go, like their lives were on the line. And from a football sense, I guess they were. But that seemed to be the difference in the first half.
It's hard to manufacture hate. I don't say hate, but I mean, the Hamilton had lots of players who had an axe to grind, and you could see that they had that juice. I mean, Hendricks and Peters, were absolutely were shot out of a cannon, and it's really difficult to generate that for a team that you've beaten every time you've played for like 3 years. So I think that Toronto did come out flat. It's not surprising that Hamilton, coming off the bye week, came in at 1,000 miles an hour, and Toronto came out flat, and unfortunately, did not come in that focused on special teams. That there were a lot of mistakes made from just not being ready. Never mind being up for a game, just being ready to play a game at a professional level. I mean, those mistakes sank them in the first half, and this should have been a game the Argos won by 10 points.
The Argos were 10-2 against the Tiger Cats coming into this one since the pandemic. So like you say, and they were 4-0 against the Tiger Cats last year. And again, Tiger Cats starting 0-5. You're right. Like it's hard to look at that and say, here come the Hamilton Tiger Cats. But yeah, from the Tiger Cats standpoint, there was desperation. They absolutely needed this win tonight, because without it, they were pretty much done. Now they're right back into it. Maybe not right back into it, but they're only 2 games behind Toronto now. And they currently hold the tiebreaker over the Argonauts as well. So had this gone the other way, you're looking at Montreal with 5 wins, Ottawa with 4, Toronto with 4, Hamilton with 0. You're in the basement at that point, and you're there to stay.
I'm sure Hamilton would love to see this Peters every game.
I know. I think that's what they thought they were signing in Jamal Peters. But yeah, he had a great game. I thought Hendricks played pretty well too. Generally, they had 6 former Toronto Argonauts, and not just former, but like from last year on this defense, and a lot of them made plays. Trevor Hoyt was in there with a play in the late stages too. So those guys wanted to show something, and they definitely did it. Coming off the bye obviously helps, but I thought Hamilton played the better game. They deserved to win. Toronto did not deserve it. It just felt like, I actually thought in those last couple of minutes, it felt like Toronto was going to win the game, but it would completely have been one they did not deserve. It just would have been one of those like, oh, that was lucky to get out of there. And so it's hard to be disappointed by a loss like that. From that standpoint, it's disappointing for Argos fans for sure, but they just didn't deserve the win tonight. They made so many mistakes. It reminds me a little bit of the Saskatchewan game in which, like, there they were somehow in the end. I have no idea how, despite losing the turnover battle 5-0. This was a little bit like that. It wasn't as lopsided in terms of turnovers, but the Argos made critical mistake after critical mistake and had no business being in this game. And then somehow, with a minute to go, there they were with the ball and a chance to tie the game up with a field goal.
Like
just nuts.
No, exactly. I mean, like instead of turnovers, you had terrible special teams play. And there was sort of like 4 specific mistakes made by special teams that weren't turnovers, but were, clear mistakes that you just can't have. And, it kind of buried the team, but it shows, that defense is able to shut teams down. Like they just need the offense to get the job done. I mean, the defense, in all honesty, is playing at an elite level. They just need the offense to put points up.
Let's talk about some of those mistakes. So it started with the block punt, and it was just a horrible way to start the game. We're barely in our seats, and Toronto ends up getting a punt blocked. It looked like Litre did not get slowed down in the least. It looked to me like Fraser Sopik was responsible for picking up Litre on that. He either didn't know it and thought someone else was coming out to pick him up, or he just got caught off guard by the inside move.
I think he blew a tire, to be honest.
That's it, eh?
Yeah,
it was hard to see from up here, and I didn't see a replay of it, but I saw him lunging towards Litre, but I just assumed he thought the inside man had him. Or he was expecting Leacher to go outside, but maybe that's it. There were a couple guys that lost their footing tonight on that last Hamilton touchdown. Deshaun Amos fell down. He had cover 0 on his man, and he just fell down. He just blew a tire, like you said. So that was the first one. Hamilton ends up at the 9-yard line, and Butler runs in the ball for the touchdown. And then not too long after that, Cameron Dukes on a 3rd and 1 quarterback sneak. Somehow, did you see a replay of this one? Because I didn't see a replay of this one. How did he lose the football on that?
I couldn't believe it either. I kept expecting it to be overturned. They did not have a good angle of it. The best replay they showed was the linebacker, the Hamilton linebacker, scraped down, and as Dukes was falling to the ground, he punched at the ball, and the ball came out as Dukes was diving forward. And you could see, like, it looked like that's what happened. It was not a very good highlight. It was from the Hamilton point of view, so you couldn't actually see the ball, but you could see him swipe at the ball while Dukes was still, like, in the process of falling to the ground.
Yeah, I think that was Kyle Wilson, the linebacker.
Yeah,
that
it was
punched at the ball.
Yeah.
And the reason I think it probably was, I'm convinced it was a fumble, is because Dukes didn't even try to object to it. He just immediately ran off the field, shaking his head. So he knew that was out. And that's just, you can't make that mistake. And that's brought back for a touchdown. So now you've got 14 points that you just handed the Hamilton Tiger Cats, just gift wrap. Here's 14 points. And then you add to that, Liram Hiralahu misses a field goal at the end of the half, and he doesn't miss. He has one miss all season, and that wasn't a particularly long field goal. It was a 42-yard field goal, so it's not like a 49 or 50-yard field goal, and he just seemed to pull it. There was no wind at the time. It wasn't anything. He just pulled the football, and that didn't even end up in a single.
No, I mean, Hamilton really, offensively, were not very successful. They had a couple of big plays. There was some bad tackling from Toronto. You can see the difference too in the physicality of the secondary from Peters to the current secondary. Like, that was a pretty stark contrast in terms of the physicality that used to be there in terms of the size of the DBs. And I would say that Toronto is a little undersized in the secondary. But Hamilton did not. Were not very successful. They had a couple of runs, they had a couple of passes, but Toronto got them off the field a lot this game. They just, the kickoff, the punt return team did not have a great game, and they just added to, to the hole that special teams dug. Um, and they just, it's frustrating because, that they definitely could have won this game, even though they would have stolen it. It would have been a great steal. I mean, it would have been an incredible Hamilton dagger. So it's frustrating that they got that close, and Peters got the unintentional PI, and they just weren't able to get a 20-yard pass down the middle of the field. They had to go sidelines, and it was a little frustrating to see the comeback come up short.
And you talk about the physicality in the secondary. This is a change that I think this Argos staff was looking for, because they were looking for, not necessarily that they wanted less physicality. Nobody wants that, but they were looking for more speed. And so it is a real transition. You look at last year's defense where you've got Jamal Peters and Tavares McFadden and Qantas Stiggers, three guys that were just ready to take your head off. And this year's crop, it's just a very different style when you look at Jonathan Edouard and Mason Pierce was out there as a cornerback, and you have Benji Franklin. Well, these are different skill sets.
Yeah, you look at that Hamilton touchdown where he kind of pinballed into the end zone, right? I mean, they are an undersized secondary. I don't think it's a fatal flaw, but it is hard after having a secondary that was so physically dominant last year. It is definitely an area of weakness in terms of cleaning up plays and keeping guys out of the end zone when you need to. They're just giving up 30 pounds and a foot to all these guys. I mean, Dunbar just laid waste to them all night.
Yeah, and there's just a mismatch there, and they ended up it's hard to get on the defense too much because they had so many injuries, and we'll talk about that. We'll get to the injuries and the severity. What appears to be some pretty serious injuries too. Fingers crossed. We never know. It's really tough to see, especially up here. I'm a mile high right now, and I'm at the 9-yard line, so I don't have the best view of anyone in the stadium certainly, but there were some injuries that looked pretty nasty, and so we'll have to see what shakes down there. But we'll get into that a little bit later. I have trouble putting it on the defense when the offense scored 10 points through 3 quarters against a team that let BC score 1,000 points in the first half the last time they took the field.
You could see all night Dukes did not. I mean, they clearly watched the Montreal film and the Saskatchewan film. I mean, Duke's first read was gone the entire night, and it was and the line just could not hold up past the first look, and that was the problem. I mean, I think they probably should have punished them a little more with the run on first down, because it kind of became pointless when it's, obviously 2nd and 8, you're not going to run the ball. But you could see it all night. Dukes would get the ball, first look is gone, and then the pressure collapsed, and Hamilton did it all night to him.
And the penalties, there weren't a ton of them, but they came at the worst times. It seemed like every time the Argos had a penalty, it erased a 15 or 20-yard play that was suddenly coming back. It seemed like Rasheed Bailey was on the unfortunate end of that, where he would make a catch over the middle and it came back again. They only ended up with 6 penalties for 40 yards. That's one of their best outputs of the season. They've been highly penalized most of the time, but yeah, all 6 of those penalties, and including the one that was declined at the end of the game, they all cost them. We'll get into that too, and where that rule came from, because that's a weird one. I'll give you a bit more on that in a few minutes. So what frustrated me about watching Cameron Dukes tonight was that I feel like he needs to take more chances. It looked like when he was looking downfield, he was playing it safe at 20 for 27 for 180 yards, no touchdowns, no interceptions. The thing is, it looks to me like he's waiting to see a bust. And if he sees a bust, he'll throw it deep downfield. But he doesn't seem to want to throw contested balls downfield. And a guy with a yard of separation deep downfield, he also doesn't really want to throw. He's fine on digs. He's fine on outs. He's fine on quicks. He's fine on hooks. But anything else that's a little deeper downfield and a little bit higher risk, he seems to have shied away from. And you can't play quarterback that way. He's got to be able to trust his receivers, because you see the difference it makes. Like at the end of the first half, he puts it up for Demonte Coxey. Coxey's one-on-one, and he puts it up for his guy. His receiver makes a play. It's a huge play. It's the biggest play of the night for the Argos, 37 yards. And that's the only time he really put the ball in harm's way. And when you've got a receiver that can make a play like that, that's an advantage. You got to do that. You can't just play it safe the whole time, and you can't only go downfield when there's a bust, a miscommunication in the secondary. So if he's going to be the quarterback going forward, he's got to learn to take those risks and just to trust his receivers and to trust himself too. And there's a yard of space, well, then get the ball in there. And he is an accurate quarterback, but he just didn't seem to want to take those risks tonight.
It's hard to be too hard on him because, of course, he feels like he has a short leash. If I throw a pick, I'm going to get taken out of the game. I mean, he's not wrong. With that line, like, you're not paranoid if you're not wrong. Like, he's not wrong. Like, the coach definitely had a short leash on him, and they're definitely like, if you throw another pick, we're going to throw you in Lake Ontario. And like, I get why coach would say that. Well, he wouldn't say that, but I mean, I get why they would be on him about picks. But like you say, you can't be a CFL quarterback and be terrified of throwing picks. So it's, it becomes a bit of a catch-22, because you've got to be able to throw picks to be a good quarterback. But if you throw picks, then you can't be the quarterback. So it's a tough. I mean, that's a tough place for Dukes to be. He's playing within himself, but that's not going to get it done to win you games. Especially if your special teams are leaking oil.
There was another play that I didn't really understand where Toronto had the ball at the Hamilton 45. It was 3rd down and 10 at the Hamilton 45. This was in the fourth quarter, and they. Oh no, Yes, I think this is right. Yeah, I think that's right. With like 5 minutes left in the fourth quarter or whatever. And they elected not to kick a field goal, which would have been a 52-yard field goal. It would have been technically into the wind, but the flags were limp at that time. And I didn't really understand that. I felt like because pregame he was hitting them from that distance. And I feel like you're down by 10 points at that stage. Why not at least try a field goal? I think it ended up being, was that a single? I think that ended up being a single.
Yes.
And made the score 27-11
it was almost a
or
perfect
something
coffin
like that.
corner, yeah.
It was, but why not kick the field? Like, would you kick a 52-yard field goal or attempt one there? I guess maybe down on the field, they just felt like the ball was getting knocked down too much going in that direction. That's the only thing I can think, because it just seemed like, again, from up here where I don't have to deal with any windy conditions, it felt like that was send your man out for a field goal.
They probably watched Beatty put a hole in Edmonton last night.
Maybe that honestly, went into it too. Maybe,
I'm sure. And they're like, God, Beatty. I mean, Beatty single-handedly defeated Edmonton last night. He was the MVP of the game between kickoff and missing field goals. So I mean, look, I'm sure as a coach, you're like, not feeling it. Didn't love that first half kick. Coaches are not keen to like kickers as it is. I didn't mind it. I thought it was. I thought it was probably the play to punt there. I mean, you could go for it, but I didn't hate it. There were a couple of times where they punted where I wish they'd gone for it. Because so often if you don't get that ball out of bounds, which after that mistake, after Hamilton returned that 3rd down punt where Toronto was like at the 50, they got better at kicking it out of bounds, which was more successful. But I would rather go for it than punt it, but I didn't mind the punt there over the field goal.
And let's talk about that last drive. So they end up in a situation that they really shouldn't have been in, but they get the ball back with just about a minute remaining, way deeper than they thought they would. And we can talk about Janarian Grant and the good and bad of Janarian Grant today, because there was great. Again, another touchdown, and it was a spectacular one. But 3 mishandled punts that he had were
weird.
Yeah, it just doesn't
I don't know
like
whether
him.
the wind, was that wind?
It's got to have been. Again, I think I'm not able to correctly gauge the wind from up here, because There's so many mosquitoes in this room right now. I'm sorry, as a little aside, I don't think I've ever. I think I must have left this window open here. But anyway, back on track. The number of mishandled balls from Janarian Grant makes me think the wind was a way bigger problem than I sensed up here. Because again, looking at the flags on the uprights at either end, it just didn't look like there was much going on. But he's not a guy that misjudges or mishandles kicks, and there were a few tonight that caused problems for him. And you think about that one at the end of the game, if he handles that correctly, the Argos probably would only need about 20 yards instead of what ended up being needing like 49 yards to get into field goal range. It was a big difference. They were lucky to even recover it in the first place. But yeah, that was a real turning point. And that
Yeah,
took
I
a bit of the
mean,
wind out of their sails.
that's almost one of those instances where it's almost like, like pump block. It's like you don't need a pump block. You don't go for a pump block every time, right? Like you're not trying to block most punts. Most times you're just trying to get down the field because, and like there, like for Janarian, it's like we don't need a kick return for touchdown there. You need a catch and you need to hold on to the ball so we can get going. Like you have to almost, like you can be more conservative there. You don't need to be looking for lanes. But I know, of course, he always will. But yeah, I don't know what to make of it. I don't know whether I assume of somebody of his experience, it had to be wind. It wouldn't be just him taking his eye off the ball. He's just way too experienced for that.
And his kick return touchdown was sensational. Did you see how little room there was
Yeah.
up the middle? It's twice now up the middle of the field. But what he does, he's so good at engineering, just generating space where his field vision is so good that he sees, okay, I need to move that guy about a foot that way so that my guy can pick up that block.
He's
And so,
actually setting blocks up.
yeah, that's what he's doing. Those little moves that he just shift right, shift left, and it's just like half a step. But that's all he needs because he's getting guys to adjust in their lanes, and now suddenly his guys have the edge on the block, and then he turns on the jets and goes up the middle. That's twice in 2 weeks, and has he got three? He's got a touchdown in 3 straight weeks in Saskatchewan, in Montreal, in Hamilton, and yet the two of those games don't end up generating wins, but. He's playing at an elite level right now. You just hate to see him mishandle some of those kicks. But this game is not on Janarian Grant by any means.
I love seeing him score the touchdown after obviously like having like a huge stack of his hair ripped out of his head.
I know. I feel like doesn't that rule feel weird because the hair is considered part of the uniform? So I think it was Litre that with two hands grabbed Janarian Grant by the hair and like threw him out of bounds by the hair.
Yeah.
And that's not a penalty, but it really feels like a penalty when you watch it. You're kind of looking and then you're like, the rule, but it's just like, that just seems like too like oddly aggressive and violent a play to not be a penalty, but it's not. It's, that's the correct no call.
It's clearly something they have to fix.
Yeah, you got to think about that.
They're going to have to come out, they're going to have to sit down and come up with, they have lots of, look, they have accidental pass interference. I mean, they're able to modulate their rules to cover circumstances. I'm sure that they're able to do something to protect players who wear their hair long.
Yeah, and Janarian Grant, like his, the ups and downs of watching him play today. But yeah, like you're saying, like to come back on the field, like the next time out, he's like, okay, you think you got me, and then to have him run it all the way back. But again, just this place got really quiet, and Hamilton got very tense for those last couple of minutes. But yeah, man, what an exciting finish. So let's talk about that last play because I know there are going to be a lot of people confused as to why the clock ran in those last few minutes. So I want to go through the last couple plays of Toronto. Well, the last few plays of the game. So 2nd and 10 on the Toronto 36, Arbuckle passes to Sindani for 4 yards. There's 29 seconds left at that point. When Sindani goes down, the clock stops because it's under 3 minutes. And then as soon as the referees get the ball set, they blow it in, the clock starts again. Correct. The next play, Nick Arbuckle throws an incomplete pass to DeMonte Coxey downfield, but there's a penalty. And so, first of all, an incomplete pass would have stopped the clock, but because it's a penalty and because it's an accepted penalty, again, the clock stops. That was a penalty on Jamal Peters for incidental pass interference. And so the ball moves up to the Toronto 50 now, and there's 14 seconds left on the clock. Now, Arbuckle passes short right to Sindani, but it's incomplete. So the clock stops, but there's a flag on the play. So the clock has been stopped for 2 straight plays. There's a flag on the play for Toronto being offside. And in my mind, instinctively, I'm thinking, well, the clock is stopped here. And obviously, the coaching staff for Toronto was thinking this. Arbuckle's thinking this. Toronto's huddling up, thinking the clock is stopping here. But there's a weird CFL rule, which, once I saw Milanovic conferencing with the officials, I was suddenly thinking, like, is there something up here that I don't know and I'm not thinking about? And the answer is yes, there was. So here's the rule, and it is a weird one. I'll read it to you. So when an infraction is committed before the ball can be snapped, after the 3-minute warning in either half, the non-offending team may A, accept the penalty, B, decline the penalty and elect whether time shall resume on the snap or when the referee declares the ball in play. So even though the clock had been stopped for the previous plays and there was no play here, because it's a penalty on the Argos in that situation, the Ticats can decide to decline the penalty and decide to have the clock start running. And that's a really odd rule. It's different in the NFL. They have a 10-second runoff, but only if the clock is moving at the time. It's not a 10-second runoff if the clock was stopped before the penalty. So it's a unique CFL rule and a weird one, and one I was not familiar with. I was caught off guard with, and I think the Argos coaching staff was as well, because again, the Argos are huddled up and the ball gets blown in, and they're kind of looking around like, well, I guess this is the last play. And that went from needing a 15-yard completion to attempt a field goal to suddenly, well, I guess it's a Hail Mary now instead. So that was a really strange time for a new rule to come up.
No, but again, you've got to play perfect football there. You can't get penalized.
Yeah, that's the thing. If that's not a penalty, then it doesn't matter. And we're talking about maybe a very different outcome.
You can't get penalized. I mean, that, this game comes down to, execution and concentration and mistakes that were made, largely on special teams, but, like offensively, they were not able to solve what Hamilton was doing and clearly, they felt like they needed to make a change, and Arbuckle came in and there was an absolute shot of adrenaline that went through the team. I mean, you could sense it. There was an energy, a crispness. He started using the middle of the field again. He threw some risky balls, but guys went out there and Polk made an amazing catch for him. Guys made, that touchdown was an amazing catch. Clearly the receivers were pretty juiced to have Arbuckle in the game, and I would imagine that he will start against Winnipeg.
Yeah, you wonder. I wouldn't be surprised to see that. I don't know if I'd be surprised either way. I'd like to hear what Coach Dinwiddie has to say about that this week, but certainly Arbuckle had the team responding. But in fairness to Dukes, and maybe kind of tempering what we saw from Arbuckle a little bit, in the drive where Arbuckle came in, Hamilton at that point, they're up big at that point, and they sat in this deep cover 3, and that certainly makes it a lot easier. The middle of the field was open, and it wasn't before. Hamilton wasn't playing off the ball that much before, but suddenly in that situation, up by a couple scores, they had 3 guys way back. And so there are big pockets that weren't there for Cameron Dukes. So I do think that's important to consider. And I'm not...
I agree. Hamilton clearly dialed it back, and Arbuckle, took advantage of it. But I just wonder if Dukes is in such a no-win zone of terrified of throwing a pick, but therefore can't be the quarterback he needs to be. And I don't know how they get him out of that zone, other than to say, no matter how many interceptions you throw, we will never take you out.
But you also can't say that.
No, of course. I know. So, I mean, I think, it'll be interesting to see how they look at it, whether they feel like, clearly teams are on to Dukes, right? I mean, he's having a hard time moving the ball.
Let's talk about that lateral, not lateral play near the end of the game? Because I'm still a little confused. And again, I don't have the best view. I'm in the north end, the north 9 yard line, and this happened about the south 9 yard line. So, I'm not sure. But here's what I saw happen: Nick Arbuckle drops back. He's just about to throw it to Polk on a hook route, but then he sees the defender suddenly close down, and that would have been a pick had he thrown that. So he tucks it in and it somehow hangs on to the ball, looks to his right and just kind of flings it out towards down to McMahon. And it ends up falling incomplete, getting scooped up by the Hamilton DB in return for a touchdown. I have the worst angle in the world. It really looked like a lateral or a backwards pass. You have the advantage of having seen a replay on that. We did not see that replay in the stadium. What did you see?
Yeah, I mean, it looked very close. Very close. Like when the ball bounced, like the pass bounced, and when it bounced, it wasn't lateral anymore. So I don't know how they decide that. Like the ball is thrown and then it hits the ground
It's
and
the
then it
direction it
bounces.
leaves his hand in. If it leaves his hand going straight or
To
backwards,
my view, it left his hand as a lateral. I mean, I swore when he threw it. I mean, what are you doing throwing that pass, Arbuckle? I mean, I know that, we talked about Dukes being too conservative, but, Arbuckle going full YOLO is also not the recipe for success. Okay. So you have to dial that back a little bit, Arbuckle. Okay. The gunslinger, like, holster that gun, son. You're going to need you to not throw. Yeah. It looked it. And I guess Hamilton didn't have a challenge left.
well,
Because
it was the command center looked at it. The command center overturned it,
yeah,
right?
well,
So
they didn't look at it for very long.
I guess not, because they like on the field they let the play continue, and then they said the command center
I would
has
have been
reviewed the
like, can I
play.
ask the command center to look at it again, please?
Yeah, well, it happens, but yeah, they'd already lost their challenge there.
No.
JB, let's talk about some of these injuries, and there are some concerning ones. So let's start on the defensive side of the ball, where there seemed to be a lot of them, and I think maybe most concerning was the last injury on the defense, which was Jared Brinkman, who went down with what looked like an ankle injury. It looked like that's what they were treating. And again, I don't like to speculate, and I don't know, but to the best of what I can see, that's what it looked like to me. And just with him going down immediately like that on that play where Bo Levi Mitchell gave himself up and Brinkman just hit the ground. And I didn't get to see a replay of that like many of these plays, but the training staff ran out to him. Jake Seresna stayed by his side, and it just looked like something that is
Well,
not
I
going to
mean,
be just like shake it off.
better ankle than Achilles.
Yeah, better ankle with ankle than Achilles, better ankle than knee probably. But to see him come off the field, he wasn't able to put any weight on it. He
No.
hopped off the field with two trainers.
I mean, I would be shocked if he wasn't down for, I mean, of course, you can dream of a sprain,
Yeah. Although
but
with his size too, like sprain's not great either. And
no,
the
but
way he
I
reacted,
mean,
I don't
I
know.
think he's clearly going to be down for a passage.
Yeah, I feel like that's going to be a six, but we'll see. And they don't have another Jared Brinkman on the team. Nobody has another Jared Brinkman. There just aren't guys like that. Like he has single-handedly stopped oppositions from running. He keeps that middle of the field jammed
I
and
thought
provides
Seresna
opportunities.
was. I thought Seresna was. I wish if we had player of the game. I thought he's obviously not 100%,
No.
and I mean, he just gutted it out, and you know, he was a monster.
Yeah,
Like
Seresna
just
and Kadeem Carey, like those were the two guys that played differently than everyone else. Like they were determined to try and get this win. Like we've seen Wyndham McManus the last couple of weeks, he kind of put that on himself. And today it was Seresna and Kadeem Carey that seemed to be able to do that on both sides of the ball. But yeah, we'll see what Jared Brinkman's status is going forward. The other injuries, in the defensive secondary, they had three guys go down. So first, Robert Priester went down with what looked like a shoulder injury on a wicked hit. He came in like a missile and just absolutely crush the Hamilton receiver, but ended up taking the worst of it
Just giving up too much, just giving up
too
too
much
much
size.
weight.
Yeah, and that's it. And he went down immediately. And I saw him on the sideline. He never took off his gear. He was trying to get back in. He was working on the sideline, doing shoulder exercises with the with the
It could
bands,
just be a
trying to get
sprain,
that. Yeah, that's it.
like sprained ACL.
Something just with his shoulder, like a I don't know, something came up, but he was trying to work that shoulder and see if he could get it back. He couldn't obviously get it back, so he went down. Tyshawn Blackburn replaced him at Sam, and then he went down as well near the end of the game. He got up very slowly on a special teams play. It was on a punt cover team, and he got up very slowly. Had to limp to the sideline, and then you had Jonathan Edouard at corner go down with what looked like an elbow or wrist or forearm injury. It looked like a bit of friendly fire where he had his arm extended as Wynton McManus came across, and it looked like the two of them collided. Again, without the benefit of replay, I'm not sure, but that's what I saw live. And man, he looked like he was in a lot of pain. Of all these injuries today, his looked the most painful from his reaction. So again, hopefully this has looked much worse than it actually was, but that's one of those that I don't know. I don't think so. And so they ended up with Fraser Sopik having to play the Sam linebacker spot, which is not at all ideal as he and Jonathan Jones were out there with Wynn and McManus. That's just not the right position for him there. And they were somehow able to nail it down. Even still, they kept Hamilton off the board in the fourth quarter despite all those injuries. And then offensively, it wasn't quite as bad. You had Rashid Bailey go down. It looked like he took a shot to the chin. It was on a quick screen to Devaris Daniels. Bailey was the point man there.
They didn't show. They only showed the replay once, and it did. It definitely looked like Peters launched himself, like torpedo style into his chin as he was trying to blow up the block.
Yeah, and so like again, we're speculating. You'd think that might be a head injury, that might be a concussion, or being observed for a concussion. So we'll see what happens with Bailey. But that really hurt the Argos too. Not only because Bailey was having a pretty good game to that point. He at that point was the Argos' leading receiver in both catches and yards. But then they got into trouble later because Devaris did not look right at the end of the game. He was really struggling. He was fighting through something. I don't know what was bothering him, but he just did not look like himself on those final two drives. And I know he caught that touchdown pass, but he was like having to haul himself back to the huddle every time. And on the second last drive, it took him a long time to get back to the Argos bench as he was walking up the sideline. And so I'm not sure he's feeling great. Now, the good news for the Argos is we are now through 6 games, and the Argos can start getting some relief. Guys that started the season on the 6-game injured list, and there are some receivers. I think Dave Ungerer is going to be ready to come back soon. I think Kevin Mittal is going to be ready to come back soon. So there are a few guys that might be there in relief, but I'm not sure the same can be said for the defense. And so we'll see how things look. They've got a full week and they need it, but I think we're going to see a lot of different faces on the defensive side of the ball for the Argos next week. Maybe a couple on the offense too. We'll have to see. Final thoughts? Sorry, go on, JB.
No, I was just going to say the one thing tonight is I do not see Labor Day the Argos coming out flat after this game. I think that Hamilton was not on Toronto's radar in terms of hate, and now welcome back Toronto Hamilton rivalry.
Yeah, and I think exactly. That's it. When these two teams next meet, it is not going to look like this. The energy that Toronto was lacking in that first half.
Fantastic Labor Day. What a Labor Day game that will be. It's of course preposterous that it's in Hamilton again, but
that's how Labor Day works. Any final thoughts, JB?
Yeah, it was a very. The first half was awful, and the second half was really entertaining. And it's too bad they didn't come up with a win. But this team, you cannot count them out.
and they stand at 3-3 now. And we said at the beginning of the season, like the key for Toronto through these first 9 games is they've got to tread water and just, keep around that, ideally above 500. But as long as you hang around 500, things will be okay. It's going to be a tough matchup next week in Winnipeg. Winnipeg is not quite as desperate as Hamilton for the win, but they're pretty close. You look at these CFL standings. Winnipeg's sitting there at 2-5. They are really close to the basement and the Edmonton Elks. So we'll see what that game looks like. But like I said, I think you're going to see a very different looking Argos defense. They are going to have to call on some guys that have not had to step up for the Argos yet this year. Well, that will just about do it for us on this post-game reaction episode of the X's and Argos podcast. Again, from Tim Hortons Field in Hamilton, it is the Hamilton Tiger Cats 27, the Toronto Argonauts 24. For JB, this is Ben Grant saying so long, and may all your pre-snap reads be good ones. I'll see ya.
Go, Toronto Argos, go, go, go. Pull together, fight the fight.